So welcome everyone to the 2021 Annual Spring Section Leaders Meeting. My name is Julianne Unite, and I am the Member Services and Engagement Manager at the Washington State Bar Association. Some of the programs that fall under my portfolio include the Sections program, so why we're all here today. In addition, I also support new member programming, mentorship programming, and other member benefits and services. So I work with a team to support all of those programs, and all of them are actually here today. So you'll have an insight into all of the team that helps to support a lot of our volunteers. What I also want to remind you all of is that this meeting is recorded and it will be posted online for later viewing, so that if you want a refresher of what you watched today, you can look at it later. Also, not all section leaders are obviously available to attend a live meeting, so they can view it at a later time. And we'll be posting this recording of this meeting and the materials like this PowerPoint presentation on our volunteer toolbox on the wsba.org webpage. In addition, after this meeting, for those that have attended, we will email you a copy of the PowerPoint slides so that you have that right away at your disposal. Before we get kicked off onto the substantive part of our meeting, I did want to go over some Zoom tips and etiquette so that we're all on the same page on expectations. I see that for most part, most of the participants have renamed themselves with their name and whether or not they're from a section or they're in other leadership or staff. So if you haven't done that already, we do ask that you add your name, but also if you're a section leader, what section you are an executive committee member from, if you're staff, adding your staff title, so that we all can see who's attending, and you'll have that information in front of you. We have a lot to cover today, so we won't have time to do individual introductions, but we figured this might be a way to at least know who's in the room. It looks like no one's joined by phone, so I'm not going to give any of those updates. If you have questions to ask or you would like to speak, we ask that you use the virtual raise hand feature in Zoom. If you're using the Zoom tool or a program, it's under reactions. So there's a reactions tab, you select reactions, and then it'll say raise hand. You can use that to raise your hand. If that's too complicated, you can also use the chat feature. We're monitoring that. So if you put something in chat, we'll also be able to see that and either answer it aloud verbally or within the chat itself. The chat will also be posted online so that folks can see what was discussed in chat as well. And then we also ask that if you're not presenting, please stay on mute, or if you're not speaking or not asking a question, that way the presenters are able to provide the information that's helpful for everyone attending today. And then so people can hear that. And then when you do need to speak or ask a question, you can unmute yourself and speak at that time. I do also want to say thank you to everyone that's in attendance today, including the staff, our volunteer section leaders, and members from our Board of Governors. So we have a great array of people joining us today, and I'm looking forward to sharing some wonderful information with you all. So the next thing that I'll go over briefly before kicking it off to our substantive portion is the agenda for today. So hopefully you all can see my screen right now. You all should have received a copy of this agenda. It was included with the meeting invitation for our section leaders meeting today. We'll start off with planning for your fiscal year 22 budget. Then we'll take a short break. We'll resume the meeting talking about partnering with the WSBA CLE team, and then finally conclude with WSBA updates. As a point of note, each presenter for these agenda items will let you all know ahead of time if they would prefer that you reserve your questions to the end of their presentation, or if it's okay to ask questions throughout. So each presenter may do something a little bit differently depending on, their presentation. So be mindful of that. And with that, I will kick it off to Liz Wick to start us off on our next agenda item.
Thanks, Julianne. My name is Liz Wick, and I am the Budget and Finance Manager for WSBA. And what I'm going to be talking to you about today is the budget planning for the upcoming fiscal year 2022. So if we could jump to the next slide. What I'm going to be covering with you, Could you flip back one, please? Thank you. So what I'm going to cover with you today is the FY22 budget schedule, documents that we're going to be sending out to you in a budget packet, and detailed explanation of these documents. And then I'm asking that you hold questions till the end, or you can type them in the chat as we go, and then I'll answer all of those questions at the end. That'll just help get through it real quick, and then we can address any questions. If I could have the next slide, please. Okay, so you'll often see throughout this presentation that we have FY in front of the number, so FY22. The reason for that is WSBA runs a fiscal year, which is what we budget for, that is different than the calendar year. Our fiscal year runs from October 1st till September 30th. So that's why we're ramping up the budgeting process now, because that's going to be coming up here sooner than we know. So the schedule that we're looking at for the budget, May 10th is when we're going to kick off the budgeting process for the sections. We'll be sending out budget worksheets and documents, and these will go out to those folks in your section that typically handle the financials. I believe that is like the chairs and the treasurers. So not everybody in your section will get this, but anybody who typically gets the financial reports. And then from May 10th to July 1st, you'll have that time to complete these templates that we send out to you. And we ask that you send them back to us on or by July 1st. During this process, on June 22nd, we're going to do a drop-in session. This is just a scheduled time where you can just come into a Zoom meeting, and myself and some of the sections leaders will be there to answer any questions you might have. If you're not able to make this session, or if you have questions outside of this session, you can definitely email us and we'll help you. Again, July 1st is the deadline for sections to submit all your budget worksheets. And this is also when we're asking that if you're going to make any dues changes for FY22, that you turn in that document at that time as well. And then starting on July 7th, the WSBA Budget and Audit Committee, which is a subcommittee of the Board of Governors, will meet and review these initial budget drafts. After that time, the WSBA staff will take a deep dive into each of your budget worksheets. And then if we have any questions or comments, we'll follow up with you at that time. And then if there are any questions or comments, or you need to make any changes, we ask that you do that by August 23rd. And the sections budget process is happening in conjunction with the entire organization budget. So on September 15th, Budget Audit will review the budget package again, and then it'll conclude in September 23rd, 24th at the Board of Governors meeting, when the entire budget will be approved. So that's the schedule we're looking at. If I could have the next slide, please. The documents that you'll be receiving on May 10th are going to be a memo that outlines everything I'm talking about today and gives you the schedule, and then goes into further detail about the process. It is the worksheet, and this is going to be the spreadsheet where you're going to be inputting all of your budget numbers. There's the form that you will use if you want to request a change to your member dues. And then we're also giving you some historical data to help with your budgeting. It's a 5-year history of what your section membership dues have been. It's a 5-year history of what your section membership count has been. We're giving you a copy of the Fiscal Policies and Procedures Manual that applies to the sections. And then we're also going to be including the FY22 per member charge memo, which is a detailed explanation of what the per member charge is and how it was calculated. And these will all be distributed to the section chairs, chair-elects, and treasurers on May 10th. And you will be receiving those as an email from sectionbudgets@wsba.org. And this is the email address that you can also use if you have any questions, and also the email we ask that you return your materials to. So if I could have the next slide, please. Okay. So now I'm just going to go through and give you a little bit of detail on each one of these pieces of the packet that you're receiving. So the section budget request worksheet, this is where you're going to be doing all of the work. It's a spreadsheet, and After this meeting, you'll receive a copy of a sample that we put together for a fictitious section that's been pre-filled out so you can see what it would look like. And the spreadsheet that we're going to send to you is going to include your 2018 through 2021 year-to-date budget and actual numbers. And this is just to give you some historicals to see how you've budgeted for the past 3 years and what the actuals have been for the past 3 years. There is a narrative column on the spreadsheet, and we ask that you fill this out for each budget line and with just a brief explanation of the purpose of the funds or any additional information that's relevant to how it was calculated, or just in general, how you came to that number. There's going to be a box at the bottom that is asking you to describe any CLE programs that you plan for FY22. And following my presentation, there will be a presentation on CLE. So this will go into that presentation will go into a lot more detail about, the CLE programs and what types of things you'll want to be putting on there. So we ask that you will be inputting your FY22 budget dollar amounts and the narrative and the CLE. So those are the only things you'll have to input on that spreadsheet. And again, these are going to be due on July 1st. Next slide, please. Okay. What you'll also receive in the packet is the 2022 section request to change member dues. This is just a real quick one-page document that's only needed if you are planning a change to your member dues. So just put down what you're planning on changing them to, fill that out, and get it back to us by July 1st. Next slide. And then one of the informational pieces is your 5-year section membership dues. And this is just a screenshot of what that's going to look like. So it just shows you the dollar amount that was charged for membership dues for the past 5 years for all of the sections. So you could just find yours and give you a guideline of what you might want to do in the future. Next slide, please. And again, here's another informational piece. This will show you the membership counts for your sections over the past 5 years. And we put on here the budget and the actual. And then as well as for 2021, we put in the actual count as of April 1st, which is the most recent data we have. Next slide, please. And then we're going to be inserting the portion of the fiscal policies and procedures manual that applies to sections. There's been no change to this since last year, so it's the exact same document, but we want you to have it. This explains the guidelines for section financial activity. The two general guidelines that I recommend that you take a look at and probably are the most relevant to planning are, it's a recommendation that section fund balances should be enough to sustain a consistent level of programming, which is 6 months of programming expenses are recommended as a guideline. And then we also recommend that you maintain no more than 2 years of expenses in your fund. So, and this is just simply a recommendation, but for best practices, keeping at least 6 months of expenses, but no more than 2. So obviously each section is different, but that's just the general guideline. Okay, next slide, please. And then the final piece you'll be receiving is the per member charge memo. What we have proposed is that the per member charge will be $18.75. This has not yet been approved. This will go in front of the Budget and Audit Committee next week on May 5th. So that's why we're calling this tentative. And a detailed breakdown of the calculation behind that charge will be distributed along with your other budget materials on May 10th. And next slide. Okay, so that's all I have today. So I'd like to open it up for questions if anybody has any. I see Governor Stevens.
Thank you, Liz. I was just wondering, the per member charge, is that unchanged, or is there a change from
There's
previous
a
year?
change. I believe it was $18.18 this year. So it is an increase.
Yeah, I can add a little more context to that, Governor Stevens. This is Kevin Platchey. I'm the Advancement Department Director here at the bar. The per member charge has never historically, at least as long as I've been at the bar, been over 1875, because that's the cap that was set at it by the board historically. The per member charge, although it was what was charged to the sections was 1875, up until last year, the actual per member charge was somewhat significantly higher than 1875. And we can pull those numbers off the top of my head. I do remember, I believe it was FY 19 and 18, it was somewhere around $22 to $24, the actual per member charge. We took a lot of effort to try and realign things to pull that per member charge down as much as we could. So the actual per member charge this year, and Liz, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we're close to a pretty certain figure on that, is right around a little over $19.
That's correct.
What the actual per member charge is. We're going to budget and audit and staying consistent with what we've been doing in the past, asking that to be 1875, which is what historically it has always been set at. So that's sort of the story on the per member charge. It's a little higher this year than it was last year, but significantly lower compared to years before prior to last year.
So I'm curious because when you talk about the actual, what's the amount that was set that because I certainly don't remember a $19 amount that the Board of Governors ever approved. So I was just kind of.
Well, it's not approved yet. We're in the very initial calculations of the PMC charge for this next budget cycle, which is FY22.
Right.
So internally, we're pulling the numbers together and developing it, and we have it pretty much put together. That's going to go to budget and audit before it goes to the board, and that's going to budget and audit on May 5th. And that's the $19 I'm talking about. That's the per member charge for FY22, the actual. But what we're asking to stay consistent with past practice is that the budget and audit committee recommend to the board that the per member charge that gets assessed to the sections stays at 1875.
Right. So I guess I'm going to ask again, what's the amount that's been assessed to the section as approved by the board? Because like I said,
well, it was $18.18 last year.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And I see Nancy Hawkins has a question in the chat. When will we have the calculations so that we can be prepared for the budget and audit meeting? And Liz had indicated we're sending those out to all of the sections on May 10th. But that will be after it's approved, because what we're hoping is budget and audit approves it May 5th. Then May 10th, we'll actually send all those materials out with the calculation behind it. If anybody, and Liz, you can jump in. Nancy, if you wanted ahead of the budget and audit meeting, I think we can probably send it out. If anybody wants it ahead of budget and audit, I think we can probably send those via email, the calculations. But they're internal calculations and they're unapproved at this point by budget and audit. Well, Nancy's put in the chat, shouldn't all sections get it ahead of time? The calculation itself is historically in the past, the sections have never gotten it before it's been approved by budget and audit, or before it's gone to budget and audit. We usually send it out with the budget materials historically. That's how we've done it in the past, is the PMC amount goes out with the budget materials that are sent out to sections, because that's what you need for budgeting purposes. Governor Stevens, is your hand still up?
Yes, but it's a couple of suggestions. First of all, even with the budget and audit committee meeting, that is not the final word. The actual final word is when the Board of Governors takes that up and approves it. So that's down the road a bit. I understand what's, I think I understand what's behind Nancy's question, which is for sections to get that information. So if they want to engage with the Budget and Audit Committee when it comes to them, they have the information, including when that meeting is happening. I would encourage Julianne and Kevin and Liz that you all do that.
Well, what I can say is all of those materials are going to be distributed for the Budget and Audit Committee meeting. So those will be posted on the website ahead of the Budget and Audit meeting. So that will include the PMC calculation and everything behind it.
I would then suggest that the sections be given notice that this is going to be taken up and a link to where they can find the materials. I understand, as a former section leader, I think I understand what's behind that, meaning, I shouldn't have to wait until later on to actually weigh in when this is being taken up.
Absolutely. And that's absolutely possible. Julianne can send an email out to the section leaders listserv with a reminder that that's going to be taken up at the Budget and Audit meeting. And I would assume we can also add the per member charge memo that will have all that backup in it. It'll also be posted to the website. Julianne, can you confirm that? I'm speaking for you, but.
You can speak for me, Kevin. Yeah, I can definitely do that once that's all available, because Budget and Audit, the meeting is next Wednesday. So I can definitely circulate that out to the section leaders listserv. Hopefully the website also gets updated before Wednesday when all that's ready to go. I'll communicate that out.
I'll follow up with Jorge after this meeting just to ensure that those materials get posted as soon as possible.
Thanks, Liz. All right, any other questions on budget? Budget's a lot. If there are no questions, I do have a request of the section leaders in all sections, basically in the budgeting process, that I would like to highlight, which is, section staff and section leaders work closely together with budget planning. And one of the things that makes it extremely helpful for everybody involved is really on that budget worksheet that Liz was talking about, that Excel spreadsheet where the sections input their numbers for the upcoming fiscal year, that for each line item that you are allocating funds for, that you provide that narrative. I can't stress that enough. The narrative that describes what you intend to do with those funds. It doesn't need to be a novel, right? We don't need, this whole tome of information, but rather if you're going to schedule or you're going to allocate, for example, $5,000 towards scholarships, donations, and grants, just give us a little heads up about what that is, like scholarships to Seattle University, right? That's very helpful enough for us so that when we process invoices for you next year, or when we do expense reimbursements, or we're, trying to send a check to someone, we can verify that with your narrative to make sure that it's consistent with what the section was planning and budgeting for. Of course, there's wiggle room. A budget doesn't mean that you're limited only to your budget. If there's an unbudgeted expense, we can definitely work together to accommodate that. But it does provide everyone a little context, not just staff, but also the other volunteers on your executive committee. As you know, what's a little strange about our budgeting process is you budget for the upcoming year in the current year. And with sections, your section leadership may turn over between the time you plan for budgeting for the following year. And so any information that you can provide that's helpful for staff to support you in administering your expenses and reimbursements and payments, and anything that's helpful to the other volunteers. There might be a new treasurer coming on board in October who might not have been involved in the budgeting process. It's very, very, very important to complete that narrative portion. And we will circle back with you if it's unclear and we don't see it per the timeline that Liz had indicated on her slides. But if you can do that affirmatively by the July 1 deadline, it's extremely helpful for us to help you and make sure that your budgets are good to go. All right, well, we're ahead of schedule if there's no other questions, or if anybody else wants to add anything, or anyone, other staff, or maybe other section leaders, if you have points on budgeting and like how you all work to budget together. I know some sections meet as an executive committee at an executive committee meeting to go over it. Some just rely on the treasurers to do it. Kevin, looks like you might want to add something.
Well, our next topic is going to be on CLEs, but since we're talking about budget numbers, one thing I wanted to let everyone know is when you're looking at budgets for CLEs, there's two different types of CLEs that you would be budgeting for. One is anything to do with a mini CLE portfolio. And when you're budgeting for the mini CLEs, you'll want to remember to budget for your revenue and for any expenses that go along with that mini CLE. If you're budgeting for the CLEs that we do under the Wsba fiscal policy, where we actually share revenue with the sections, just a reminder that you won't budget for any cost when you're budgeting for those CLEs, because all the costs are borne by Wsba CLE. So you won't budget for any cost in your section expense sheet for a Wsba CLE that you're doing in partnership with us under that revenue sharing model. And then the other thing is, when you're budgeting for your revenue from Wsba CLE, which is the splits that we share in under that fiscal policy model, we'll be providing that figure, the estimated split that you're on track to earn. So that will actually be coded into your budget when you get it. So we're trying to just make it easier for you, so you don't have to really, put a lot of thought into that portion of it. So we'll actually have your estimated splits that will be estimated to be paid to you in the first quarter of FY22 already populated into the budget.
Thank you for adding that, Kevin. Yes, we're trying to identify ways of making this easier for you. We know it's a lot of work. It's a tremendous amount of work on the sections to complete these budgets, especially, more than a year ahead of time. So we do want to do what we can to support you, streamline it, make it as efficient and easy as possible, giving you enough time as well. I know some of the feedback we received last year was there wasn't enough time to do the budgeting. So now we're hoping that, this is more time for you to be able, if you need to, as a section, meet to discuss what your budget plans are for fiscal year 22 and have that opportunity. And also providing you the opportunity, work with us, right? Reach out to myself, Carolyn, Liz. If you have any questions, we're here to be your resource. So if you have recommendations on how we can improve the process, we welcome that as well. So if there's anything that we can do to better improve it, please let us know. We can't think of it all on our own, and we really would like to hear your feedback and input on that. All right, any other questions or comments? Any best practices to share with budgeting from section leaders? Don't want to put you all on the spot, but it might be helpful to share if you're great at budgeting. All right, well, hearing none, I don't mind being ahead of schedule. So I'll ask the CLE team, would you be ready to start on your presentation, and then maybe we'll take a break after the CLE's presentation and then end with WSBA updates. All right, I think I see yeses. It's a little difficult for me to see, but all right. Thank you, Liz. Appreciate you for providing us fiscal year 22 budget information. And now I will move forward on our meeting to our next part of the presentation, which is partnering with WSBA CLE. And I'll hand it off to Kevin Plachi and Shanti Raghu to get us started.
Thank you, Julianne, and it's nice to see everyone. My name is Shanti Raghu, and I am the Education Programs Manager at the Washington State Bar.
Hello, everybody. I'm Kevin Plachi. I'm the Director of Advancement here at the bar.
Next slide. So we have a brief presentation, and we'd ask that you hold questions till the end. You can, of course, chat in the chat feature throughout. Although we do have some presentation points to relate to you, we want to spend a good portion of this time together to answer your questions and have a dialogue. So the main point of our presentation today is really to talk about the different ways you can partner with WSBA CLE, and then to, again, have that question and answer and conversation at the end. Next slide. So WSBA CLE, we are a team, and as a whole at the WSBA, we put on a number of programs. So I wanted to provide you, backing up a little bit, a big picture idea of all the different portfolios, buckets, however you want to call it, of programming that we produce on an annual basis. So in addition to partnering with the sections on section CLEs and mini CLEs, we have a couple other categories of programming. Regulatory programming is such as reinstatement. We put those programs on in collaboration with our colleagues in regulatory services. Some of you may be familiar with the Legal Lunchbox. That's the free monthly, last Tuesday of every month, free live webcast that's 90 minutes. And by virtue of attending Legal Lunchbox for 3 years, the idea is that you'd be able to fulfill your MCLE requirements. So we work on developing content for that. New member education. Some of you may be familiar with our practice primers. That's an opportunity to dive deep in some topics, substantive practice areas. They're meant to be building blocks, really content and curriculum developed specifically with the new member in mind. Another program in that bucket is the trial advocacy program. And historically that has been delivered in conjunction with a mock trial. Then we also have the Wsba Presents portfolio, which is a lot of our ethics programming. It's also some of our annual programming, and some topics that might be of general interest, of relevant, timely, emerging areas that might be of interest to multiple practice areas. And then really what we're here to talk about today are the mini CLEs and the section CLEs. Those are the programs we do in partnership with you. And as a whole, we produce well over 400 credit hours. Kevin, if you want to talk a little bit more about the business model here, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you, Shanti. So I just want to give a high-level overview of how Wsba CLE fits within the entire Wsba organization. So the Wsba CLE is an operation within the bar that is self-sustaining. And what that means is, by and large, with the exception of support of the Legal Lunchbox and a little bit of the new member programming and mini CLEs, the Wsba CLE operation depends on revenue from the programs we deliver to sustain our operation. And what that means is we don't draw, the Wsba CLE operation does not draw on license fees to operate, because it is reliant on the registration fees of the programs to maintain itself. So it's kind of always good to keep that in mind, because of the idea that it is a self-sustaining model. That's sort of and what we are is a market participant. So you might, a differentiation that sometimes gets confused is between CLE and our MCLE department. And MCLE is mandatory continuing legal education department, and that's in our regulatory services department. And MCLE is responsible for making sure all of the members meet their CLE regulatory requirements. Wsba CLE, which is who we are, is a market participant that actually provides CLEs to the market. So that's just kind of a high level overview of Wsba CLE within the organization itself. So I'll turn it back over to you, Shanti.
Thanks, Kevin. Those are really good things to keep in mind. So next slide. So again, we're here to talk about section CLEs and mini CLEs. These are the two ways that we partner with you sections to deliver content. This past year, we have been working to support the delivery of these programs virtually. So that means when a section has chosen to deliver half, full, or multi-day, we've supported the delivery via our web platform On24. Mini CLEs, all of you sections I know have been quite busy putting on great content for our members and delivering those virtually this past year. So next slide. Again, we're here to talk about the two options to partner with WSBA CLE. This is a high-level chart. Some of you may have seen this before. It's something we've shared previously with section leaders. It really outlines the two different ways sections can partner and provides you at a glance comparison covering major differences between the two. We've talked a little bit about how revenue is tracked in the half and full days, a little bit, just a little bit, but we will get into that more so later. And so that's one major difference between the two. You know, credit hours is another major difference. When we're talking about delivering 2 credits or fewer, the mini model is really the track that you might want to go down. When we're talking about 3 credits or more, that's when you might want to think about the half or full multi-day model. So mini CLEs, briefly, it's all outlined here, but they can be more conducive to changes in the law where you're wanting to put together a short, quick program with tuition set at less and shorter credits, obviously. A half day, full day, that could be your opportunity to get into some themes, to dive in deeper into some substantive law and get into some advanced material. You'll have increased WSBA staff support. We'll be working with you closely, and we'll be working to support this program and produce it on demand and make that available for up to 3 years. Again, Kevin's alluded to the fact that there's no cost that you need to factor in for these programs, but we'll be tracking revenue. A little bit more on that later. Next slide. This is just really a transition slide. We're moving to talk a little bit more about half day, full day. Next slide, please.
Yeah, I'll jump in and take over here and talk about this part of the model. So as Shanti had mentioned, there's 2 ways that we work with the sections in CLE. One is under the fiscal policy that's set up for Wsba CLE and the sections to share net revenue, to share section splits. And under that model is where we develop the longer programs, which would be half-day, full-day, and multi-day seminars. And when we talk about multi-day seminars, we're really talking about the section mid-years usually. They're off-site conferences that take place over several days. Under this model, as Shanti had already indicated, there's much more staff support in how we work with sections, the faculty, how we put together materials for the program. It's much more heavy on staff support. So when you work on a program under this model, you're assigned an education programs lead who is assigned to work with you as the program chair to develop the program. And as faculty are recruited, the education programs lead will actually work with the faculty. They do faculty onboarding calls and orientation calls to help the faculty understand all the things that go into delivering a CLE, particularly a little more intensive this past year, because we're doing them all remotely. So there's a lot of orientation towards the technology end of it as well. The education programs lead and our coursebook coordinator also obtains all of the materials from the faculty members and compiles them into a very professional coursebook that goes along with the program. So that's compiled into a PDF Wsba coursebook that is outlined with chapters, and it follows the agenda of the program. So, so that's kind of the crux of our half, full, and multi-day seminars. On the fiscal side of things, as we've already discussed, and I'm going to get into this more a couple slides down in detail in how the financials work, but essentially we take the program, the live program, convert it to an on-demand program that lives on our Wsba CLE store for 3 years. And we take the revenue from the live program, the revenue from the on-demand program that we track over 3 years, and we share the net revenue with the sections after all expenses are accounted for. And I'll get into that into more detail, like I said, a couple slides down. I'm going to turn it over to Shanti now to go over the next slide.
Thanks, Kevin. So this is talking about, we're still talking about half full multi-days. So with some of that in mind and picking up off of what Liz just presented about budgeting, we're hoping that you'll note your plans for the next fiscal year, FY22, regarding what you plan to do as far as your CLEs for that fiscal year in the budget worksheet. We're looking for just approximately the month and year that you plan to deliver the program, a short description, and kind of the duration, half full, multi-day. What are you thinking? This helps us plan on our end because we are also budgeting on our end for the overall CLE operation. It also helps us help you kind of keep in mind some of the things that you'll want to be tracking on budget. We've already said this over and over again, expenses, you don't need to budget for expenses in the half full day model, but sometimes, and this hasn't been the case recently, but if you're doing something extra, like a section may be doing something where they have a section sponsored lunch, that might be something you might want to budget for. There is a future budget impact. We've talked about, we're tracking the sales over a 3-year period and allotting section splits of any net. And so those will be potential future revenue opportunities. So although you're not accounting for any expenses likely, you're not accounting for any revenues on a particular program right away, it's something that could have a potential future impact on your overall budget. So it's something that it's good to keep in mind when you're planning and thinking about budgets anyway. So we talked about kind of how that works with the staff and the volunteer role. This is our timeline. Really, we start to step it into high gear about 3 months out, but we like to get the dates and the calendars and that sort of thing figured out about 6 months prior at minimum. And then you can be working on recruiting presenters and developing your theme over that period. And then we'll, like I said, step it into high gear 3 months out. And we have timelines and processes in place, but this is really just to provide you kind of a planning trajectory for your sake, high level. Next slide. Kevin, if you could take this. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So this slide is the one that talks about the financial split with sections under the current fiscal policy. And just some history on this fiscal policy. It changed in starting in FY19. This fiscal policy was adopted by the board, and it was adopted in response to a few things. One being the 2016 MCLE rule change that did away with the live requirement for CLE credits. So now under the current MCLE rules that changed in 2016, any attorney can get all of their CLE credits fulfilled through on demand. It doesn't have to be live. So that was one thing that happened in 2016 that really took a hit on live revenue for Wsba CLE. CLE live attendance and revenue dropped somewhere around 40% by the end of 2017, we had noticed. And under our prior fiscal policy and our splits with sections, for those of you that have been around a while, you probably remember it, is it was set up to where we only split revenue on live programs. So only the live revenue was taken into account for section splits prior to this new policy that's in existence. And we heard from sections that, given all the changes and adjustments in the market with the changes in MCLE rules, that that sections wanted to be able to share in the on-demand revenue from their programs as well as the live. And we went to work on finding a way to make that happen. And so this policy was born out of that initiative. Some of you were probably around when we kind of went through the process of adopting this policy. There was quite a bit of pre-work that was done in terms of bringing the sections in before we adopted anything. We had several full-on large meetings with the section members to go over what we were thinking and to go over the various models. I actually attended pretty much all of the section executive committee meetings to go over the proposed models and explain them. And we ended nearing the end of FY18 with a full meeting at our bar offices with the section leaders to go over the final proposal and to get consensus among the section leaders about the adoption of the policy, which we did towards the end of FY18. So that's just some history and context on how we got to the policy. The way it works, just as a broad overview, is now we take the income that's earned from your live seminar, we convert the live seminar into an on-demand seminar that goes on our Wsba CLE store for a sales cycle of 3 years. And we chart the revenue. We track the revenue over 3 years, and all of the revenue that's earned from the day of the live program up until it's taken off the store on the 3-year sales cycle is tracked, and that revenue is counted and split with the sections. Now, what we split is net revenue. So the gross revenue is all the revenue that's earned from the live and the on-demand. The net revenue is all of the gross revenue that I just talked about minus the direct costs that go into the program, which the direct costs are lots of things. It's reimbursement of faculty. It could be facilities charges, any cost that's directly related to the program. And that's also for the on-demand program as well. There's not as many direct costs for converting it to on-demand, but we do have a license fee that gets allocated out because we pay a license fee to the to maintain the online store. And that's somewhere a little over $40,000 a year for that license fee. So we allocate out per program the portion of that license fee. So that's mostly the direct costs for the on-demand. Then we take the indirect costs out, and the indirect costs are the overhead and staff costs that are allocated to the CLE operation. And we take the amount of overhead and salaries and divide it by the number of credits that are produced each year. And like Shanti said, we generally produce in a normal year around 400 credit hours per year. So that's allocated out on a per credit hour basis. And so when you take the indirect cost and the direct cost out of the gross revenue, that leaves the net revenue. And so we split the net revenue up to $8,000, 50-50 to the section. That's 50% to Wsba, 50% to the section. After $8,000 of net revenue is earned, the split goes 35% to the section, 50% to Wsba. And this was discussed with the full section group when we were adopting the policy. And the idea behind this sort of staggered split percentage is because under this new fiscal policy model, unlike the other one, if a section seminar does not cover all the costs, the loss on that seminar is not allocated out to the section. The section doesn't bear the loss. Wsba CLE bears the loss. So a section will never have a financial loss from putting on a seminar under this model. Whereas in the prior model, if a seminar did not cover all its costs, the loss of that seminar would be allocated to the section budget, and the section would bear the loss. And that's not the case anymore. So that's the idea behind the fiscal model of under this way in which we partner to develop programming. Now this is very different than the mini CLE model. The mini CLE model is an entirely different model, and Shanti will talk about that on the next slide. And then we are, just so you know, we are reserving a very fair amount of time to have discussion and dialogue and answer questions and dive into conversations about all of this. So we'll have ample opportunity to talk about this on the other side, but I'll hand it over to Shanti to talk about mini CLEs.
Thanks, Kevin. Before we go to mini CLEs, I just wanted to add a couple of things, if I may. So some things that I take away from this is, it's kind of it can be a slower trickle. So you're not seeing an immediate return of revenue or split. It's going to be something we track over 3 years. And if there is a net revenue, that will be split over that 3-year period. We're seeing a trend where in the 3rd year, sales are dropping a little bit. So you really see once the expenses are covered, it's in that first flush of money that you'll see like the most, and then it'll probably trickle down. The other thing that's a takeaway for me from this is that might be helpful. Shoot, it just went in one and out the other. That if your section, if the program, the whole idea is that, we know that there are going to be programs that will operate at a loss. That's understood, and that was factored into this whole model. And there are different ways that different sections may look at their finances and determine whether a program is a success or not. So I just want to let people know that that was understood in the creation of this whole thing, that there are going to be some section programs that are going to operate at a loss, and that there are other reasons and priorities and goals behind delivering that program and and determining whether or not it is a success or not. So that I just wanted to flag that, because that might be come up for some sections, that their programs are not covering expenses, but yet there's still a mission oriented reason why we should support, and that's also factored into this overall budget.
Hey, Shanti, before you go to the next slide, can I jump in? Thank you. You reminded me of something I wanted to say, and you kind of got at it, but I'd like to just drive this point home a little bit more. This is compared to what the fiscal policy was prior to FY19, this is a longer game in realizing your split. And Shanti and I just met with, I don't know if I think someone, maybe Beth's here, from the intellectual properties section. We just met with their executive committee to kind of go over this, so they better help them get a better handle on this split. And what we explained there is this is kind of a long-term game. So because these run on the store for 3 years, where you really start seeing some traction is once you get 3 programs into the pipeline that are that are constantly going through. So if you do a program every year, it would behoove you to keep those programs going and producing every year, because you've got a pipeline of programs now, and can see at some point you could have 2 to 3 programs, if you only do 1 a year, that are now paying you splits as we move along, because you've got more programs that are cycling through the pipeline that are subject to the split. So I just wanted to mention that it does take a little while, and intellectual property is a good example of this. Their IP Institute, it took a year for that to start realizing a split. But this year they did earn a split that was actually more than any of the splits they had earned like 3 years prior under the old policy. There was a gap, though. It took a year to get there. But as long as they keep producing that program and they've got 3 in the pipe, the amount of split is just going to go up for them because they built up a pipeline. So intellectual property, I appreciate you giving us the opportunity to use your situation as an example, but it's a good one because it really personifies how there is a little bit of a lag that occurs here, but then it pays off. It can pay off. Okay, Shanti.
Thanks. Next slide.
Shanti, I'm sorry. I do see that Governor Stevens put in a question, and I'll answer it very quickly if that's okay. So Governor Stevens, the revenue sharing starts immediately. It's just that the seminar has to get over the cost before we start sharing the net revenue. And it's usually that the first surge of that on-demand revenue is what's getting it over the hill for costs, where we then can start sharing the revenue. So it's not that if the live program earns enough that it covers off those costs, then the split starts sooner. And that's happened with programs too. Several RPPT, family law program really we started sharing splits in the first year because it was so successful in the live, and also had a really pretty robust first few months on the store.
And some of that has also been a situation of our times where a lot of the direct costs are less in our virtual environment. And so getting over that initial hump of expenses has been maybe easier if the program performs relatively well in the live, because the direct expenses, like what would have been attributed to meals or facility, are nothing to low. So that's a lot on half day, full days. That's a lot on the financial model. We can get back to it if you have questions about it, but moving on to the next slide, I'd like to spend some time on minis.
Shanti, before we do that, I just would like to do a time check. I know per the agenda, we scheduled a break at 4 o'clock, but since we're a little ahead of schedule, if it's okay with the presenters to keep going and the attendees to keep going through the CLE presentation, if that's okay, and we'll just save the break until after CLE. Hopefully that works for folks. If you need to step away, please do. Again, this is recorded, but I just want to do a time check. If people want to take a break now, maybe we pause before we move into mini CLE. Otherwise, we can keep going. I'm not seeing any burning requests to take a break. So, all right, I think let's continue with mini CLE. Thanks, Shanti.
Thanks, Julianne. So, mini CLEs. We've talked about this before. Again, we're talking about the shorter, 2 hours or less, $35 or less, and this is an option for you if you're interested in partnering with WSBA to deliver shorter, low-cost programming. Next slide, please. So these mini CLEs are meant to be section member benefit. They are, I've said, up to 2 CLE credits, up to $35 in tuition set. Sometimes sections will set tuition at 0 or discounted for their section members as a section benefit. It's meant to be a low cost to the section, but there are expenses that may be involved. If you are delivering via a platform that has an expense associated with our webinar platform, there is a $100 expense. There are accreditation expenses, which are $12. So some expenses you will want to account. And going back to our earlier conversation, those are things you might want to put in your budget sheets. With these, the section keeps any revenue. We're talking that these are delivered virtually right now. They have been this past year, and this is due to the pandemic. MCLE requirements apply, meaning that the presenters are required to put together materials to accompany their sessions, and we ask for a copy of those. We serve as a Form 1 sponsor, which means we're sending it up for accreditation, and we're reporting the CLE credits for people who attend. But the role clarity and role breakdown, the section really plays more of a program logistics, coordinating directly with the presenter's role when it comes to mini CLEs. And the Wsba staff and role is really focused more so on, the administrative logistics and making sure the Form 1 accreditation registration is set up, all of those details. So that's kind of the breakdown with that. And I will hand it back to Kevin.
Yeah, thanks, Shanti. Can we go to the next slide, please? So before, I'm going to hand this back to Shanti to actually go over the details of this slide, but before she jumps into that, I just wanted to say, make a couple of announcements actually, that I think is going to be real helpful to everyone. I know that since the pandemic started, we've been hearing from sections about wanting to use having other options, technology options to use to deliver the CLEs. Some sections like using On24, some like to use other tools. We were, and from what we were hearing is the sections really wanted to be able to use Zoom, like Zoom meeting, like what we're on right now, to deliver mini CLEs if possible. Now our kind of struggle that we were struggling with this is Zoom meeting does not have a option for capturing the logins of people to pull a report out for attendance. And under the MCLE requirements, as a sponsor of a CLE, we're required to pull a log of proof of attendance when a program is remote. So we kind of went to work on that. I'm not sure if Randy's on. I know we worked with Randy on running a test on this. I don't see him here, but what we ended up doing is figuring out a way to create a survey monkey, and we can have the section sponsor, whoever's coordinating, the producer of the program, put a survey monkey link into the chat box of the Zoom program, and just have attendees click that survey monkey and confirm their attendance, because that also confirms that they were logged into the system, because by virtue of getting into that chat box and clicking the link, we also know they were logged into the program. So this was sort of our workaround to the this requirement that was sort of holding us back here. So with that, the announcement is, there's two announcements I want to make. One is for those who really like On24, but miss this idea of having video and having the ability to see video, because the way On24 works now, it's a true webinar platform. And what that means is it's a PowerPoint slide and you can hear the audio of the presenter, but you don't see anybody. What we are able to do now is, thanks to some ingenuity from Rex and his team, we will be able to incorporate video into the On24 platform for minis. There are some caveats to that that maybe Shanti will talk about a little bit more, but the presenter's got to have a camera on their computer. We'll probably do a little more training with the producer on that, so they know how to prep the faculty to get access to the camera with On24. But the good news is we are going to be able to incorporate video into that, so we have that visual component with On24. The other good news is we are going to roll out Zoom for sections use with mini CLEs. Like I said, we've got some little workarounds we'll have to do, as they come in terms of gathering up the attendance, so we know we have proof of reporting attendance, but all that can be worked around. So those are two announcements I want to make, and I just wanted you all to know that we're here to try and come up with solutions to make the benefits that you all are trying so hard to provide to your members as robust and effective as they can be. And I hope this is helping do just that. And so Shanti, I'll hand it back to you, but I see Nancy's hand up. We can probably take Nancy's question.
Okay.
Actually, I just see that Robert asked the same question in the chat line. So
Kevin, do we want to save that till the end?
Yeah, we can. If that's, we'll have plenty of time. I think we can answer it if you want to finish up this slide.
Okay. Yeah. So keeping in mind those two new things, I know that some of you may be more used to the model than others, more comfortable with what we're talking about, the terminology, the process, and some of you may not. So I want to back up a little bit. So again, this is one of the ways that WSBA CLE can partner with you as a section to deliver a shorter, low-cost program. We look for some information from you, which we collect via what's called an event form. It will prompt you to think through some of the details related to the program description, how much you're charging, date, time, those sort of details, your speakers, their bios. We collect all of that information and we use it in different ways to set up registration, marketing, sponsor the program, all of that. So this is a way of us getting that information from you to be able to support the program on our end. So we look for that completed event form around 6 weeks prior. There are other details that you might want to keep in mind. Some of the things that we've been seeing lately, sections are partnering with other sections. We love that. If that's the case, there might be a letter of agreement that's involved, and we would want to work with you to support you in getting that all set and squared away. And that might be something you might want to factor into your timeline. Again, this timeline is there for some reasons, so we can build in and be able to support your program, make sure it's the success that we also want it to be. But there is flexibility in that timeline. So if you're in a position where you're putting together something in a shorter than 6-week period of time, just reach out to us. The mini CLE at WSBA email is the best way to reach out to us, and we can talk about what we can do to support. So if it's ever the case that it's a shorter timeline, just reach out affirmatively to start the conversation. Kevin has talked about the technology, and really that's what this slide is for. We have made On24, which is the On24 web platform, is the platform we use to deliver our half-full multi-day programs. We've made it available to you as one option to deliver your programs virtually. Because it's the platform we use for all of our whole process, our whole operation, it is integrated with some of our systems, our registration, our confirmation. We're able to pull attendance reports. So it works a little bit more seamlessly than if you were to go with a third party. Because it's our tool, also, we're a little bit more familiar with it. And we want to spend time with you as a volunteer to make sure that you're comfortable and trained up and able to run a program on your own day of. Because the mini CLEs, like we've talked about, a lot of the day of and program logistics are going to rest on you as a section volunteer. So in order to help you run a successful program, we set up a training with you so that you're up to speed with all the nuances of the platform. Now, we've talked about third-party platform options, including Zoom. So that's always an option to you. There are just some details we need to figure out because of the reasons Kevin outlined. And because it's not this integrated with a lot of our processes, there's a little bit more admin and logistics that we need to sort out with you as a section volunteer. So we've named, in the case that the platform doesn't provide a system, what I'm calling a system generated attendance report, we have that workaround that Kevin outlined. Because it doesn't integrate with our confirmation emails, we close registration 2 business days prior. So we make sure that we can communicate to the attendees the login information, because that's not getting automatically sent out to them. So third-party platforms, including Zoom, we've seen others like WebEx. I'm not sure what other sections are using. They're always an option for you. We just want to make sure we get these little details sorted out and are on the same page about how that's going to run. So with that, I think that's basically what I wanted to run through. And we can just move to the next slide, which is questions, conversation. And I know we already have that question from Robert earlier. So maybe we start with that. I will read it and maybe Kevin, you can respond. It was directed to you, but great news on the video. Many sections are content with On24 for mini CLEs. However, with COVID, demand is high, and as I understand it, Wsba has just one runtime license. So no 2 sections can run mini CLE at the same time. Can that license be expanded, understanding that it will be at a cost? And Robert, if you're wanting to add to that.
No, that's just it. I've now had an opportunity to run a few myself. I took your little course, your lesson, that was great. But I understand that there's sort of a competition for time, and especially at the noon and early afternoon slots. So the issue is simply whether that can be expanded by the bars. There can be concurrent mini CLEs and not so much difficulty scheduling. So that's my question.
Yeah, so that's a good question. And Shanti, what have you been doing recently with that? What is your practice?
So we like to we have our license exists, and that we only have the ability, like Robert just articulated, to run one at a time. I know there's been some flexibility that our vendor has provided given the pandemic, but really we haven't been running more than one at a time.
Yeah, and I
You
think
have.
that, and I can go into that a little bit more. I think we could. I mean, it would be costly to add on to that license, so we'd have to look at the cost analysis of it. I do think where we can, I think where we have done more than one is if it's not both in competition, if both aren't on 24. So like if there's a Zoom one that wants to run and an on 24 one at the same time, then I think those could happen. But the other reason, Robert, that we have to be careful with bunching up CLEs occurring at the same time is because when you're running a CLE on 24, we also have staff providing tech support for that, so that if things go wrong, you've got backup to help you. So even if we could get to where we could run two, I don't think we could go beyond that because of staffing constraints with getting people, getting you the tech support for the program with our staff. That's another part of the equation. It's not just the limitation of the license. It's that somebody would be running without tech support.
Okay, so it's not just a runtime license issue, it's also our resources.
Yeah.
Okay, I appreciate that, Kevin, thanks.
Questions, comments?
I see Nancy posted a question about what is the cost at another on 24 slot. Sorry, Hari, this is Rex Nolte, broadcast services manager with the Washington State Bar. It's a pleasure to see you all today. So it's been a long time since we've asked, but the last time we did request a concurrent offering, it was $8,000 annually to increase the cost of our contract. I'd imagine that number's gone up a little bit since then. And as Shanti mentioned, On24 has given some leniency to allow concurrent sessions if you end up double booked. But as Kevin and Shanti have articulated, staffing is also a concern for us. So there's the technology availability, but it's also what the Wsba staff can handle to ensure high quality programming.
Yeah, and this is Kevin, what I would add to that is when we were going over all those buckets of programming at the beginning, it's the same staff that are performing all of those buckets of programming. So it's not like we've got different staff for one bucket of programming and different staff for the other. This entire same staff is handling all of that. So, so we kind of have to balance staffing constraints with everything else when we're looking at supporting all the various programs. So I think it's just worth sort of pointing that out, that when we talk about staffing constraints, it's not, we don't have just a dedicated staff person to handle tech support for mini CLEs. That's really Rex and Clay, and they're doing tech support for all of the programs we deliver.
Yeah, and also supporting the attendees. In case an attendee ever reaches out to us, we have our team who responds, provides them the link, maybe troubleshoots with their access. And some of these minis, we're really excited to see we have a couple hundred people attending. So
Yeah.
you can imagine that sometimes the volume can be high. And if we're running multiple programs, that can cause a capacity concern. So we just want to make sure we're in a position to support. And we're here to support you in making sure that the attendee experience is also strong.
Looks like Nick has his hand up.
Hi, thanks. Couple questions. I'm not sure who would be best to answer this. Basically on the tuition front, so for standard mini CLE, let's say, so Elder Law is thinking of starting these up. Let's say we're willing to run it at a loss. We don't want to charge our members anything. So we could just commit to paying basically the $112 that would get us the On24 and the accreditation, and we could invite up to, you know, our 900 members in our section or whatever, and there'd be no additional charge than 112.
Correct.
Hey, Nick,
Okay.
this one thing I would suggest when you're, because Elder Law's not done minis before, have they?
Right, we're thinking of launching it, yeah.
Yeah, so and we can talk offline more if you want, but I would suggest, you know, a lot of the sections that do minis, and the section leaders on here jump in, a lot of times they offer the mini CLE for free to their section members. So like all elder law section members would get it for free. And on our store, it can, like, we've got if you're running it through On24, it can tell who's a section member and who isn't on the checkout at the store. So it would give all of your section members the seminar for free. And then a lot of the sections charge a small fee to non-section members.
Sure.
And so then you're getting your section members in for free, but also getting some revenue and income from the program from other section members that still want to attend, or any member, any Wsba member that's maybe not even a section member. So you're able to earn a little bit of revenue from it as well that way, but still support your section members.
Okay, and then,
go
ahead.
But I would also suggest for your non-members, you may still offer it for free if they join the section.
Right.
So that again, I mean, just in terms of building up section membership, now yours seems pretty healthy, so maybe you don't need that. But for others listening, I mean, that's always also the option for the mini. And for the larger ones, Kevin, you know, we have oftentimes sections have actually included a section membership option and kind of reduce the tuition, the section taking the hit on that, but reduce the tuition to get people to join the section for the longer programs.
Yeah, good point, Governor Stevens. We do have a join the section registration option. So, you know, when you're working on the programs that are under the fiscal split, the bigger programs, you can set up that registration option. Just talk to the education programs lead you're working with. It's Miriam Gordon is our education programs lead that really works heavily with the sections under this portfolio. But it's a good way to help build your section membership up a little bit as well, because people can join your section, pay the section fee, and still get the seminar cheaper than if they just didn't join the section at all and signed up for it.
Okay, one other question on the tuition. So you mentioned there's some different options for the half day. Is that set, or a whole day, is that set by the section that's sponsoring it? Or is that? Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, we have a set pricing for that under that portfolio that's been approved by the board. So that is we don't have discretion to go higher with the pricing than what the board has dictated, except for offsites. That's where we've been given discretion, but we can go lower. But when we're always thinking about pricing, we have to keep in consideration, and from my viewpoint and lens, as the person in charge of maintaining the stability of this program, we have to keep in mind that the revenues do have to support the program. That goes back to what I talked about before, that we're a self-sustaining program. So the pricing on the program should be set in partnership with us for those programs. And then on the mini CLE model, they are capped at 35. So by policy, you can't go over $35 for those programs. You're free to offer whatever price you want to on the mini model. That's up to you as the section.
Okay,
on the other model, we would want to set the pricing in partnership with us, because we've got the eye on the overall sort of business model that self-sustaining business model.
So I do see some great comments and questions in the thread, and I know that will be captured later, but just to read off some of there was a question about whether or not the audio PowerPoint version in the On24 is still available. That is still an option if your presenter or you as the section volunteer are planning intentionally and would like to keep it as an audio PowerPoint only presentation, that is still available to you.
Looks like Anne's got a question in the
Well, I'll
chat.
just say a little more on that point Shanti just made quickly. So it's basically just we add the control panel in there that gives you the ability to activate your webcam, right, and a microphone. So if someone wants to be audio only, you could use web audio only and no webcam, right? Or you could just dial in. So there's two ways in which you could create an audio only situation. Just keep your camera off. You can just dial in and do that. If you have a panel of people, you could have a mix, some on the webcam, some not. If someone has trouble, they could drop their webcam and call in, and we'll provide all that in the training. So there'll be options, but the dial in is definitely still there.
Mm-hmm. So the idea behind that is that we would work with you as a volunteer so that you're comfortable to work directly with the presenter, and they can between you and the presenter can support the program day of once we do this kind of knowledge transfer and get you comfortable with it. We're, again, a little hands-off day of. We're here to make sure things are running smoothly, but hopefully with just some brief training, you are able to run the show and support your presenters in whatever they decide to do, video, audio, whatever it is. Anne's question, do you anticipate being able to change the no recording for third-party platforms, mini CLEs, so that section members can view later, even if no credit allowed?
I can jump in on that one. Hi, Anne.
Hi, Kevin. Yeah, I just
Yeah, it's a good question, and we're working on it is the answer.
Okay.
So here's our challenge, sort of like we had to come up with a workaround for using Zoom meeting with the Survey Monkey and finding a new way to figure out how to capture attendance. We're working through it for all these third-party platforms. And here's sort of the crux of the issue, and it's more than this, but this is one of the bigger crux of the issues, is on these Zoom meetings, you're recording people's face, you're recording their voices, you're recording all kinds of things, and it comes up to sort of a permission issue for, getting permission from people to record them and give their have them live on a recording somewhere. So we're trying to figure that out. And then also a little bit of thought going into, what it means to have the recordings live on in a Zoom account that's not really owned by Wsba. So we're putting some thought into that, but we know it's out there, and because as it sits on On24, we provide an archive link, and you can put it on your section webpage, for no credit. And we want to be able to do the same, at least for Zoom, get that figured out. There's some other third-party platforms that sections use, like GoToMeeting. There's a whole bunch of them, and we don't say you can't use one or not the other as long as it fits our ability to capture attendance. But it's just figuring out those couple issues that I just articulated are the ones that we're sort of wading through right now to figure out. And I think, none of this is impossible. We can come up with something. We are working on it, and we definitely want to be able to provide that. So we've got that kind of weaving through the process internally to get something approved on how we do it. And maybe it's as simple as, we come up with a script that every section producer says at the beginning of the program that says, you're going to be recorded. If you don't want to be, now's your chance to, leave or whatever. But we're thinking through it for sure, just so you know. It's not something we're aware and we're trying to find a solution.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, I think that there are a lot of considerations to that, and we'll look forward to getting some more guidance about that.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Anne. Any other questions on the CLE presentation?
It looks like there's a question from Ellie in the chat.
Oh, would you share with section leaders? Yeah, Ellie, we can figure that out. We'll have to look into what the cost would be. Right now, the website for the sections to use on 24 for minis is $100 right now. We'd have to see what impact it would have if we were to upgrade the license. But we can look into it. The other factor, again, like I said, we've got to keep in consideration is our ability to also support the technical side of it when we're delivering it.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions?
I have one quick question. Materials requirement for the mini CLE, and this is maybe more of an MCLE question, but it looks like you have to get those submitted in advance, or is that something we just, I guess probably depends on the On24 versus Zoom question as well.
So how it works for us is we're standing by the program based on your program description, our assessment of it, and sending up a Form 1. We're what's called a self-accredited sponsor. So we are trusting that you are working with your presenters and preparing materials. APR 11 is the accreditation standards. It says that materials have to be distributed at the time of the program. So one way or another, the understanding is that you are making materials available to your attendees during the program, whether that's a PowerPoint or handouts you're distributing. That's what we are working under, the operating assumption. Then for our sake, for our files, and as the Form 1 sponsor, we ask for a copy to be sent to us. So we keep that on our end in case there's any questions or MCLE comes back and asks to look at those. So that's how that works for us to fulfill the MCLE requirements and standby accreditation.
Perfect, thanks.
I would add from my seat as broadcast services manager and basically working on every mini that Wsba is supporting, programs that don't have materials available as a handout at the start of the presentation, we get a lot of questions about where's the materials, where's the handout. It's much more ideal to have it available, even if you send it a couple hours prior. People like to have it available prior to the program, and you can avoid lots of questions if you just get something available as a download in the resource pod of whatever platform you're using. It really does
Rex,
save
you put those in
15 plus emails every time. So,
So we ask for
Rex, I've got a question. And on 24, you put those in the resource pod, right? You or Clay?
correct. So, when you're using the On24 platform, we basically build your classroom for you. There's features in there, whereas producers and presenters, you can upload your PowerPoint and your videos, but it views the resource pod as like a master administration backend access. So we then ask that once your materials are final, you send them to us, and then we will upload them to you. Ideally 48 hours prior. We know that you're working with volunteers and there's a lot of moving parts. So we do our best to accommodate up to the last minute as possible. So I would prefer to get them in the hour prior than to not get them at all, to be honest.
So we can
and as
help.
Kevin said, there's two of us, Clay and I. We're pumping out lots of credits here, but we are a small team, and so we want to say yes to all, and we're working on it.
So when you're using the On24 platform, we can help by distributing those materials, like we've talked about. We're using some terminology, we're uploading in the resource pod. So just send it to us in advance and we can do that. And that kind of gets you to where we want to be distributing those materials to the attendees during the program. Yes, so I know we've had we've met for a long time without a break. I guess the only other thing I'll add before we wrap up, and if you have questions, feel free to reach out to either myself or Kevin. I know some sections have affirmatively reached out as they're starting to think about CLEs and plans and want to have more of a one-on-one conversation given the particularities of their section. I'm more than happy to schedule those one-off, or if you want either one of us to join an existing section meeting, happy to do so. My direct email is my first name, last initial, shantir@wsba.org. And then also right now, I'm the one responding to the mini CLE at Wsba.org inbox. So if you have questions specifically for minis, you can reach out there too, and I will get back to you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Shanti, Kevin, Rex, everybody that participated in that wonderful discussion. Let's take a break. I know folks will really like to take a break. So right now it looks like it's 4:41 according to my clock. Let's plan to come back at 4:55. We're a little ahead of schedule, so I think that should still give us enough time to go over the last portion of our meeting. We'll keep the room open. I'll turn off the recording while we're on break. The room will be open, so if you just want to get up and walk away, feel free to do that, or join us again around 4:55. Thank you all. See you in a bit.